last two, and then actually, see if I want to.
All right, everybody. It's 5 after 4, so I think in the interest of time, we will go ahead and get started today. So I want to say thank you to everybody for joining us for the 2024 W. Kendall McNabney Lectureship. I will introduce our speaker here in a second, but I always like to start off just giving a little history and reminder of Dr. McNabney. So obviously this is a picture of the current campus, although we keep building buildings, so we'll have to get a new picture here at some point. University Health picture on the left there, trauma bays on the right. But obviously it didn't always look like this. This is what Old General looked like just over the hill over here. And these are some great quotes from the Star at the time. So I don't know if we can get such wonderful quotes nowadays, but we may not always be the classiest act in town, but the emergency room is a tough act to follow. So they did make particular note that the emergency room boasts at least 2 doctors on duty at a time. So we generally have 2 on duty. Usually there are more. So here's a picture of Dr. McNabney answering the biocom. So that just shows you how many generations of computers and technology we've gone through to get where we are. Oh, I guess it would be helpful if I did share the screen. Yeah, that would be good. I knew I could manage to mess that up. All right. Very good. I apologize to those online. So here's again just some articles that were put out about emergency medicine. So if you remember, Dr. McNabney was kind of on the forefront of developing emergency medicine in the country after he returned from his tour in Vietnam. That was kind of at an inflection point in the country where we realized that we did not do emergency medicine well in this country and that we needed designated, trained providers that could provide emergency care to anyone, anytime, anything. So he was the chair of emergency medicine from 1972 to 86. He founded our residency program in 73, was president of the predecessor to SAEM, which was the University Association of EMS. And then he served on the ABIM Board of Directors from 82 to 86. I think this quote sums up Dr. McNabney well, in that the mediocre teacher tells, the good teacher explains, the superior teacher demonstrates, and the great teacher inspires. And I think Dr. McNabney definitely inspired a lot of people to show their best, do what was right for the patient, and treat each other with respect and dignity. So, Dr. McNabney touched a lot of residents and faculty over the years. So here's just a grouping of our residency classes. So here's Dr. Sullivan here, Dr. Grattan here, Dr. Steele in the back here. That was for Sullivan. So a few more classes. I don't know, this class apparently went to some mountain to get their class taken, to get their class picture taken. So here's just more classes that have graduated through the years. So, and then last year's class. So, and then Dr. McNabney, certainly, he worked hard, but he liked to play hard too. He enjoyed having a good time. Here's a picture of him and his wife, Elaine. So that takes us to the introduction of our guest speaker. So I'm excited to be able to introduce Dr. Bittner. Dr. Bittner graduated in '98 from Hampton-Sydney College in Virginia with his bachelor's degree. He attended the University of Miami School of Medicine, went on to get a master's in education from the University of Cincinnati. He completed his emergency medicine residency at Emory in '07, followed by an EMS fellowship at Emory as well. He then, after Emory, went on to Duke University, where he was an assistant and associate professor of emergency medicine, and then moved to South Carolina, where he became an associate professor of emergency medicine in 2015, and then professor in 2021, as well as he is currently a professor also at Clemson University in the School of Health Science Research. Dr. Bittner has quite a long list of service accomplishments. He currently is the chair of emergency medicine at Prisma Health Upstate University of South Carolina. He's president of the South Carolina College of Emergency Physicians. He's an ABIM oral examiner and item writer, and throughout his career has directed multiple flight and EMS services in emergency departments. He's got over 40 international and national presentations, 60 publications and book chapters, and has received numerous awards, including multiple Residence Awards. He founded his company called Vigilant. Maybe you'll explain at some point what that is, but it involves telehealth as well as logistics, advising. And then another side gig of his is he works for the NFL, and that he helps provide medical coverage at the draft, Super Bowl, and Pro Bowl, I think is what you said. And so he does some behind the scenes work. He was here last year in town for the draft, and he might touch a little bit on what he does there. So he clearly is very busy and does a lot of things, wears a lot of hats, but I feel fortunate that he convinced him to come spend the day with us here in Kansas City. He got to experience some nice Kansas City hail this morning. So, you know, we ordered that just for you. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bittner. I need to reshare. Yeah. All right. I think you're good to go.
Thanks. Thanks, Dr. Ogden, for that introduction. I've actually never counted up my presentations and publications, so I hope that you got it right. Thank you for coming. I want to start by saying that despite this being titled "The Dead and Those About to Die," you will not need epinephrine in this talk. You don't need really any clinical knowledge. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I want to talk about, as a physician, as a leader, how we advocate during times of crisis, whether that is advocating at the bedside for your patients, advocating for your specialty, advocating for your school or your organization. He hit on some of the disclosures. I direct integrated training for Medical Sports Group. That's the company that does the NFL. I am a principal for Vigilant Protective Health Services. We are a global telemedicine advisory, logistics, and professional staffing company that provides services to commercial and governmental clients. However, none of that has anything to do with what I'm going to talk about today. No pertinent disclosures. I will also endeavor to have as least number of words on the slide as possible. All pictures were in the public domain. Either I took them or they were used with the permission of the creator or they were licensed under Creative Commons. I start every talk where I work at Prisma Health with our purpose statement, and I'm sure that University Health has a purpose statement or a mission statement, in that, you know, our goal as physicians, and these are common things that are very hard to argue with, right? If you read a purpose statement that generates debate, it probably was a poorly written one, okay? So my goal is that at the end of this, that you in some form or fashion are inspiring, okay? That you want to serve with compassion and be the difference, like I said, at the bedside or as a department. Much to Dr. Alden's dismay, I will not be talking about NAPKI and enter recirculation. My goal is that you don't fall asleep during this lecture. My fear is that if I talked about this, that you would. Now, I think that there are many things that hopefully are not shocking, and in the end, I hope that we just have an opportunity for discourse around topics that have created angst for us as physicians, as a specialty, and as a society in sort of dealing with post-COVID world that we find ourselves in. A little bit of my path, Dr. Algren talked on it, but I've lived in, I think, 18 states, moved 27 times. People asked me if I was a military brat, and I said, no, I was a beer brat, because my father worked for Miller Brewing Company, and he was a troubleshooter. I studied at Miami. I worked at Emory Grady. They say Grady made and Emory proud. If you train at a really much the same that Truman Medical Center is as a service to your community, as a provider of care to those who not only need the excellence that you provide, but may have nowhere else to go. I trained in pre-hospital and disaster medicine as the Medtronic Physio Control Fellow at Emory, and then people say, well, why did you get a Master's of Education as an EMS Fellow? And I recognize that, you guys have, and gals have probably all heard that doctor in Latin means to teach, but yet we receive very little instruction in how to teach those that are in our care. And so I was focused on adult instructional system design so that hopefully people will remember what you teach them. I had the unfortunate responsibility of being the chief resident in the trauma zone the day that the Bluffton bus accident occurred in Atlanta. That was a university athletic team that went off an overpass and rolled over, thinking that the left-hand lane was HOV, and it was actually a left-hand exit that went up. And then as a fellow, I was the one responsible for on-scene medical care for the Botanical Garden collapse. So learned a lot about mass casualties, and during my time, we had the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, come speak at Emory and give a symposium, and I learned how to work with intergovernmental agencies, the Diplomatic Security Service, the CIA, and the FBI. And if that wasn't enough, the fellow was assigned to run the race for the Tour of Georgia. So the Tour of Georgia is a professional stage race. That was like Lance Armstrong days. You take 135 cyclists at 28 miles an hour up and down mountains over the course of 5 or 6 days. In Georgia, we had a couple of bad accidents, and we had done some response planning, which had good outcomes for the patient. And so the production company actually asked me to come here to Missouri and do the tour of Missouri. The Ozarks are beautiful, but not downhill at 70 miles an hour in Lycra. And so I found myself touring with the Tour of Utah, the Tour of California, teaching emergency medical response planning at the Olympic Training Center for our athletes, because our goal as a physician is to be able to care for any patient anywhere, anytime, right? Anything that they say, bring them all. That was the book from ACEP. I toured your emergency department today. Beautiful. You have pods that's separated by geography, but you don't know when you walk in the room what type of patient's going to be in the room. And so I found myself translating athletics and emergency response planning to transitions of care, which led me actually into EMS. When I moved to Duke, Duke was a big cycling town, or I should say Chapel Hill was a big cycling town, but I was responsible for fixed stadiums. Wallace Wade is the football stadium, and Cameron Indoor, which ultimately led me to my work with the NFL. Now, around this time, the Affordable Care Act was coming out, and we were moving to a hub and spoke model, and I was asked to lead a community hospital with the Duke LifePoint venture, and I found myself spending more time looking at spreadsheets and charts, talking about left without being seen, average length of stay for discharge patients, hacks and haws and PSI 90, and all the preventable things that we do to patients when we are striving to provide high quality care. And that's really where I found the love of leadership, in that as a physician, you can only care for the patient you have in front of you at the bedside, but as an academic physician, there's an opportunity to influence the lives of all the residents that you teach. The average emergency physician will see 300,000 patients in their career over the course of their career. I think most attendings endeavor that you remember one thing that they teach you in the 3 years that they have you, and so how can you garner a broader impact? I worked in community hospitals for MCare. We're going to talk a little bit about private equity and Envision and KKR until I found my way to the Greenville Health System, which has now been merged with another health system to form Prisma Health. I say that to say that I've worked in critical access hospitals and large academic centers in ivory towers. For those of you who are not familiar with Greenville, Greenville is in Charlanta. There are, I think, 15 economic mega centers in the United States, and Greenville forms the center of the Charlotte-Atlanta market. We have 6 specialty hospitals, 12 acute hospitals. We're a $6 billion company. This will play into a little bit as I talk about the economic pressures we're experiencing in healthcare. We're a member of a 3,400 physician group. But more importantly, for those that are in the room around emergency medicine, I have approximately 165 faculty, 30 residents, APCs, PAs, and NPs. So we have about 200 individuals who staff 7 emergency departments taking care of 350,000 patients annually. That means that if you walk into an emergency department in the state of South Carolina, there's a 50-50 chance it is a Prisma Health emergency department. There's a 1 in 3 chance it's one of the departments that we staff. Our physicians see a new patient every 1 minute and 26 seconds, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We are the 3rd largest in the medical group and the largest department in the School of Medicine. As the dean is in the room, I will mention deans are very appreciative of individuals who can play multiple positions within an organization. So my department, we'll talk about the power of yes, has people that teach about diabetes just like they teach about fractures, just like they teach about cardiac emergencies. It is a little bit of a potpourri talk, I've given several different types of talks, and thank you for those that responded to the Survey Monkey, but I really want to focus on 3 really broad topics. 1, the economic pressures and the landscape of U.S. healthcare that we find ourselves practicing in, the importance of advocacy, and I'm going to use clinician mix as the use case for that. And then I want to talk about self-advocacy and a sustainable clinical practice environment. Anybody here seen Frozen 2? Do you remember the scene where Olaf goes through the entire Frozen 1 in 30 seconds? Okay, I'm going to endeavor to compress all of the economic pressures in U.S. healthcare into the next 30 seconds. So has anybody ever seen this U.S. News and World Report? Crisis in the ER. Turnaways and huge delays are a surefire recipe for disaster. So not a lot of people saw this. And when we talk about the crisis in the ER, this has been going on for a while. The reason that nobody paid attention to this is that this U.S. News and World Report was published on September 10th, 2001, the day before 9/11. Fast forward, this is a study by PLOS, I forget what it stands for, looked at ED closures from 2005 to 2015, and you can see one thing is true, whether you look at urban, large rural, small rural, or isolated EDs, the visits are going up and the ERs are going down. It's most telling in the conglomerate here, and you can see that the Southeast, the Midwest, have had the highest number of closures, the yellows and greens. The lighter it is, the more closures we've had. But that's okay, because we live in a disruptive environment. So I'm sure many of you heard Berkshire Hathaway, Amazon, and JP Morgan Chase were going to harness and leverage technology to cure our woes of access of primary care by forming a company called Haven. And we all know that went smashingly well because then they closed it after only 3 years. It's incredibly hard space to work in. Healthcare is an incredibly hard space to work in. They subsequently shut down their primary care for their own employees the following year. And we see this repeated even more recently. Walgreens closed 160 Village MD clinics. This is April of this year. Cigna, one of the 4 large insurers in the United States. If you look at insurers, just remember Cuba, that's Cigna, United, Blue Cross, and Aetna. They represent nearly 85% of the market share. And Cigna just basically wrote off their entire Village MD investment. Walmart shuttered their health centers. This was just last week. So you can see that what we do on a daily basis, right? We show up every day taking care of patients. We've been doing it for hundreds of years, not as an emergency physician. We were only founded in the 60s and 70s through the Alexandria plan. But as physicians, like, there's no easy nut to crack here. If there was an easy button, we would have figured it out. If you look at large health systems, the top 10 are listed here, Kaiser down to Mass General and Brigham. You don't need to read it. I circled Prisma Health somewhere in the middle. That's the red circle. But know that there has been intense market pressure since about 2010 in terms of consolidation. You might have seen it here in this market with buying of hospitals, additions of hospitals. But we're seeing fewer and fewer choices in the healthcare workplace. At the same time, we're seeing insurers post incredible profits. So United Healthcare posted a $5.5 billion profit in the fourth quarter. Anybody remember what I said my entire health system's annual revenue was? It's like $6 billion, right? This is $5.5 billion in profit in 3 months after United Healthcare has been alleged to be responsible in one of the largest IT hacks around Change Healthcare, which shut down billing for like 80% of the country, okay? It's still posting profits, okay? So we have less EDs, we have more visits, we have consolidation in the healthcare marketplace, we have insurers reaping benefits that digital companies and technology companies have failed to be able to leverage. We have the Senate doing inquiries. This is Andrew Whitty, he's the CEO of United Healthcare, who's asked to talk about the Change debacle that happened last month. And we have seen the same thing corollary in physician employment models. So it used to be you graduated from medical school, you went to residency, and then you could hang a shingle, you could join a private practice, you could have a democratic group, you could join a hospital as an employed physician, you could join a contract management group in emergency medicine. You can work for an insurer. The largest employer of physicians in the United States is an insurer, not a hospital. There are lots of opportunities, and those have been distilled down to where 3 out of 4 physicians were either hospital employed or corporately employed by January of this year. So you can see that on the clinician side, on the payer side or the processor side, and on the delivery system side, everybody is feeling like they're just stuck in a pressure cooker. Within our own specialty, we have seen a backlash around private equity-owned firms. KKR owns Envision, Blackstone owns Team Health. We've seen ERs that have gone on strike. We've seen, I guess, senatorial probes. And then if you look in academic medicine, this gets published. And this was published in August of 2021. It's the Emergency Medicine Physician Workforce, projections for 2030. It showed that there was supposed to be a surplus of 9,000 physicians per year by 2030. Now, I'll tell you what I tell all the students I counsel about emergency medicine, is that when in your life have you made a decision based on data 10 years in the past about 10 years in the future? Because that's what the workforce was. And don't forget, right in the middle of this, we had COVID. So not unexpectedly, we saw a drop in applications to emergency medicine, right? And everybody started to like freak out. And then this year, we saw a rebound and really excellent performance in the match. And I have faith that we have a vibrant group of young physicians who are going to continue our specialty, okay? So don't feel like you're in a pressure cooker. Don't feel like you want to pull your hair out. And you might be saying, like, what do I need to know all this for? And why is this important to me in my career if I just want to take care of patients? So Alfred Whitehead, one of his famous sayings, he was a scientist, and he talked about that the business of the future is meant to be dangerous. And it is because everybody in this room, the merits of science, that we equip the future for its duties. Okay, so there is lots to be unknown, there's lots to be discovered. It doesn't necessarily need to be feared. I want to talk first about advocacy. This came up in our Survey Monkey, and many of you have heard about advocacy as a euphemism for going to your state capitol and talking to your legislators, okay? But advocacy is a process by which you either argue or plead for or against something. You advocate for your patients every day, when you call social work and try to get that prescription filled. You advocate for your colleagues when you cover a shift because they have a sick family member. I'm going to talk about legislative advocacy, but one of your roles as a physician is to be an advocate for yourself, for your colleagues, for your patients, for your family, and for your community. This is me, obviously, if you hadn't figured that out. One of my interns, one of my medical directors, and one of my program directors, we went to our state capitol a few weeks ago to talk to lobbyists about a variety of things. And we found that they had very little understanding about what a physician actually does. We were leaving the room with the state senator when the state committee on vaccination, childhood vaccinations, was entering the room. There was not a single medical representative in the room. When asked, they said, well, we have Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith was a chiropractor. And the senators didn't know the difference between an MD, a DO, a DC, a PhD, a doctor of pharmacy, a doctor of nursing. And so it is not their fault. It is just the reality. And I go back to the beginning of the talk. Doctor means to teach. One of your roles will be to educate. I want to use an example here. I'm doing some Google on the congressional districts in Missouri. This is from 2022. For many of you who don't know it, the U.S. House of Representatives right here is Emanuel Cleaver. Is he a well-known local politician? So there were 230,500 people who voted. I don't have my speaker notes, so forgive me if my stats are partially off, but that only represented about 29% of the population. Okay, there's about 750,000 people in the district. He won by a margin of about 50,000 votes. If you look at the state, a little bit heavier on the Republican, but almost 50-50 Republican-Democrat. If you look at like the cross-segment of the people that participate and live their lives in the community you serve, healthcare and social services represents 14.7% of the community. That's about 115,000 people participate in healthcare. That's us. Let's do some back of the napkin math about what this means for emergency medicine, even though I think off Google this is back of the paper towel math. I went to the ACEP directory. I looked up how many members are in the Missouri College of Emergency Physicians. You have 684. Then I went to the state website and looked how many licensed hospitals you have. You have 161, which means at any given time, there'll be at least 161 physicians who are coming off night shift. Now, if Dr. Algren staffs his department like I staff mine, you probably have more coverage in the afternoons and evenings and swing shift. That's your busier volumes. And so if you take about 60%, 65% of those individuals, that means 445 emergency physicians are either preparing to come to work or are physically working. That actually only leaves 78 people left to advocate. Now, I just said 50-50 have kids in soccer practice and, you know, college interviews for the University of Wisconsin and other institutions, and it becomes very challenging to fit that into your life. That leaves only 39 individuals. But I told you, only 29% of the population voted in that election, which means there's only 11 people. And of the 11 people that are left, in order to win a vote, you only need 6 votes. So elections on broad scales are determined by a relatively committed group of small individuals. You can make a difference. Now, Kristen Bibbins-Domingo is an epidemiologist. She's not a physician. She trained at the University of California, San Francisco. And she gave a speech recently in Philadelphia that I attended. She said that stands for You Can Stay Forever, UCSF. But she decided to leave, and she is the editor-in-chief of JAMA. Everybody heard of JAMA and all the associated journals? And she wrote an op-ed in July of 2022 as there was starting to be an emergence and a really a large volume of data that started pouring out around COVID, right? Like, should we be using hydroxyquinoline? Should we be using chlorine wipes? You name it, right? And she said it's paramount that voices in the room where decisions are made are representative of diversity of thought, expertise, and backgrounds. Mark Twain said that 85% of life was showing up. And so if you're not in the room, you can't have that conversation. I want to use a use case of clinician mix. And this was in the Survey Monkey. I had to call Dr. Algren and talk about it because I wasn't sure what the respondents meant when they said, could you please talk about advocacy in physician-led care and advocacy in an anti-physician world? And so when I read that, the first thing I thought about was a lecture I had attended by an emergency physician who was talking about workforce. And he put this slide up. This is North Canyon Network of Care. It is a relatively rural, small health system in southern Idaho. And he said, when you click on find a doctor in emergency medicine, these are the clinicians that you have to see, okay? Now, the first thought I see when I see this is that this is incredibly inflammatory and divisive, okay? I'm sure at some point in your training, somebody has told you healthcare is a team sport, right? We live and die by our nurses. We live and die by our advanced practice clinicians, and we live and die by our colleagues. Now, if you look at our college, the American College of Emergency Physicians, we actually have policy statements on this, that physicians, assistants, or associates and nurse practitioners are integral and valued members of a physician-led emergency department care team. Like, I don't see how anybody can disagree with that statement. I will also tell you that they say that because what we do is very complex, right? We have a large volume of undifferentiated patients who come in for acute episodic problems, many of which can't talk to you for a variety of metabolic, toxicologic, neurologic reasons. And that because of the nature of the practice of our medicine, the gold standard of care is that care should be provided by a physician, and that NPs and PAs should not perform independent, unsupervised care in the emergency department. Well, that's great, right? These are policy statements written by people who are all emergency physicians, who are all concerned about like somebody moving their cheese. Do you know that phrase, somebody move my cheese? So I want to tell you the story of two cities. This is the Hattiesburg Clinic, and it's really centered around primary care. And the Hattiesburg Clinic was on a journey. In healthcare, we talk about being on journeys to value-based care. That means that we moved from fee-for-service to payment for outcomes. And they said, we're gonna look at all of our clinicians, we're gonna rank them by per member per month spend. That's how much do we spend to keep this person healthy in a primary care environment? Because we need to talk to those individuals. If the outcomes are the same and people are healthy, why should we spend more versus spend less? We obviously want to spend less to have the same outcomes. But when they ranked those, they found that with the exception of average hypertension for blood pressure less than 140/90, physicians outperformed these annual wellness metrics over APCs who practiced independently. Now, you read that, and I again think, oh, that probably sounds like it's even more inflammatory. Right now we have objective data that shows that advanced practice clinicians should not practice independently. Now, they looked at cost of care, ED utilization, near and dear to our hearts as emergency physicians, right? Primary care physicians referring people into the emergency department, and patient experience. And they found that APPs are crucial, but should not function independently. Okay, now this is a primary care model in the Hattiesburg Clinic. So it's very easy for us to say in an acute hospital that that does not apply. So Becker's covered this. If you don't know Becker's, Becker's is a large trade publication that puts out stuff every day. And they quoted a study by this two economists that was solely looking at the effects of nurse practitioners in emergency departments in the VA system, because since 2016, the VA system has had independent practice for advanced practice clinicians. And I'll tell you, they compared 156 NPs to 1,300 physicians, but they did it over 1 million visits, 1.1 million visits. And there's tons of infographics around this, right? Nurse practitioners added $74 million to the annual cost, and they had an 11% increased length of stay and 20% more 30-day preventable hospitalizations, overall increasing the cost of care in the emergency department to 7%. They did decrease opioid utilization, but they increased antibiotic prescriptions. And I liken this to toast versus croissant, okay? Both are bread products and perfectly acceptable for breakfast, okay? Making toast is much easier than making a croissant. And in fact, croissants considered one of the top 10 most difficult things to make when I have to work the dough. This is akin to asking an EMT why they didn't intubate, or asking somebody to differentiate phlegmatia cerulean dolens to leukocytoclastic vasculitis, okay, or meningococcemia, okay? One person needs an LP and antibiotics, one person needs to stop using levamisole-tainted cocaine, okay? For the residents in the room, you should look those up. Those are good case studies, okay? So we have unrealistic expectations when we have a variety of clinicians at a variety of stages in training who are expected to be right all the time, every time, never miss a time, with 98% accuracy. It would be unheard of in any other industry. So it's really an apples to apples comparison, or an apples to oranges comparison, and it's not the questions that we should really be asking. We should be saying how we as physicians can lead in care models that make sense. How do we embrace our APC colleagues, and how do we use them to increase the things that are important and decrease the things that are not? As we drive towards zero harm, there are opportunities for throughput and quality and alternative care models. That is not you being replaced by somebody else or somebody else replacing you. It is how we are all in the same field taking care of the patients, because the patients will keep coming. Now, I do believe it's really hard for a PA or a nurse practitioner or a resident or a nurse to be able to ask a doctor a question if there's no doctor on duty, okay? Indiana made headlines when they passed a bill requiring emergency departments to have a physician on site. Virginia is working on it. And even here in Missouri, your House Bill 2548 has passed the House, and the Senate is waiting to talk to the Health and Welfare Committee, okay? What I would tell you is that our patients don't have a choice, okay, when they get brought to see you. Much the same that you don't have a choice in caring for them. You have a federal mandate to provide care. And so how do we provide transparency so people can make informed decisions? You know, I started this section on advocacy talking about how 684 members of the Missouri College of Emergency Physicians got distilled down to 6 votes. And it reminded me of Margaret Mead's quote that says, "Never doubt a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." The hard part is remembering that means that you, as a physician or a mother or a father or a sister or a brother or a medical director or a chair who have many competing interests, gets up and gets out of bed, doesn't get fed up, but speaks out when something is important for you and your patients. Now, that's a lot about what we should do as doctors. And I had really struggled with how to talk about a sustainable clinical practice environment. As a chair, I use this term a lot. My goal is to make sure that you have a sustainable clinical practice environment, because there are 2 ways that you can hire physicians into a practice. You can hire to retire them, or you can hire to fire them. And obviously, we don't want to fire anybody, okay? We call this our war on burnout. WAR stands for wellness and resiliency, though I'm going to talk about some topics that I believe that resiliency is perhaps a farce. I started by saying my dad worked for Miller Brewing Company, so I want to talk about 2 concepts. One is tempered glass. The other is Poisson distributions of work, okay? Now, you don't know it, but you work in both of these systems. So the way we make tempered glass is you heat it and rapidly cool it, and heat it and rapidly cool it. And this creates an incredible amount of surface tension underneath that makes the glass stronger than the glass that is underneath it. However, if there are imperfections in the glass in the cooling process, it also predisposes it to shatter, okay? I think the emergency department, in some form or fashion, is a form of tempered glass. We have been exposed to heat and cool, we've been exposed to stressors, and we have incredible strength on the surface. But if we expose an imperfection in the system, whether that be boarding, your psych unit shutting down, your length of stay going up, okay, it has the potential to shatter the system, and we saw that in COVID. The other thing I want to talk about is Poisson and non-Poisson distributions of work. Anybody here an industrial engineer? Anybody ever heard these terms? So I like to talk about bottling lines because, again, Miller Brewing Company, right? So unbeknownst to me, because I was like 6 at the time, the production of a bottle is directly proportional to the number of pumps that are in the line because pumping molten glass is very corrosive. And so if you decrease the number of pumps, you can keep the bottling line up. Now the bottling line, if I put a bottle at the beginning of the line, I know that in 2 minutes and 43 seconds, no matter if there's 1 bottle on the line or 10,000 bottles on the line, the next bottle will come off the other end. That is because each bottle makes its journey along the bottling line independent of every other bottle on the line. That is a Poisson distribution of work. It is always ready to accept the next bottle. Non-Poisson distributions have codependencies. My favorite non-Poisson distribution of work is an emergency department. Every patient who's waiting on a CT depends on the patient waiting on their urine, depends on the lab being back for their creatinine, depends on how many people are in the waiting room, how many inbound ambulances you have, how many bays you have open for trauma, how many radiologists are reading, how many radiologists are not reading, how many phlebotomists you have if you use phlebotomists, how many nurses you have you gone down for your nurse staffing, have you flexed off staffing? For healthcare system leaders in the room, I'm sure you've seen productivity index, and they want to have nursing productivity indexes at 100%. Non-Poisson distributions are incredibly inefficient at 100%. Maximum productivity occurs at 85%. Try convincing a hospital administrator to run at 85% productivity. But if you run above 85%, you're never ready to accept the next unit of work, i.e. the next patient that arrives. You have to have capacity, a bed, a doctor, a nurse. So, remember, Poisson and non-Poisson distributions of work. So we work in a high-stress environment, right? Strong on the surface, subject to crack. Medscape comes out and says, congratulations, you made the top of our rankings, right? 60% of our physicians are burnt out. This is not something that we needed to be told, right? We experience it every day. And quite honestly, it's challenging and sad to practice in an environment where even the data reinforces how you feel, right? Never answer a feeling with a fact, but when the facts reinforce the feelings, it becomes very hard to continue to work in that environment. So on or about January, we started this well-being index survey. We were surveying our attendings, APCs, residents. Lower is better. These are all tracking up, right? And we started this about 2 months before this. Anybody know what this is? This is a slide to my department meeting. March 3rd, 2020. Anybody know what happened March 3rd, 2020? COVID, right? I had just come back from spring break with my kids. They would never go back to school again. It was a Tuesday. Tuesday's always department meeting. At that time, I had a vice chair of operations. The very next day, I had a director of preparedness, and I was down a vice chair. The very next day, we had our first COVID patient at our sister hospital, and I was on the phone to Singapore buying KN95 masks with my personal American Express. Like the world got turned upside down. I like to refer to COVID as a black hole. Does everybody know what a black hole is? Like the astronomical definition of a black hole? It is a center of gravitational force that sucks everything into it that not even light can escape. Okay? So how do we reconcile that we talk about wellness and resiliency? How do we reconcile the quadruple aim? You heard of the quadruple aim? Or the 4-point aim? How do we make this work for self, for family, for home, and for our communities when we're struggling with this? And I look up at my wall. I don't know where I got this because when I moved into the office, this was on the bulletin board and I thought, oh, I should just leave it there. That's really good. It's like, how do team members stay where they work, right? Because team members want to feel mentored and challenged and promoted, involved and on a mission and trusted and appreciated. And I find myself saying these things when I talk to my faculty over and over. I want you to feel mentored and trusted and challenged and involved and on mission and appreciated. These are all things that we all want. How do we reconcile that with the economic forces we're feeling and this burnout that everybody tells us that we're having? So I like to talk about a concept called anti-fragility. Anybody heard about anti-fragility? So this is why I think that resiliency is false. Resiliency means that if I have a system and I apply an insult, I just smack it down, it bounces back to where it was. Never better, never stronger. And anti-fragility is the concept that you apply an insult to a system and you actually improve and are better than you were when it started. This is a tree grown in high winds. The tree could bend over and bend back when the wind goes away, and it will never be stronger than it is if it improves with every insult and grows and thrives. So that's why I wanted to call it, wellness and anti-fragility, but then it would be wellness AF, and my director of well-being thought that was a bad acronym. So I think about this book by this guy named Eric Weiner, and he is probably the person I look up to because he was an NPR war correspondent. He covered the bubonic plague in New Delhi and Islamic hatred, and then he said, I am miserable, and I convince a publisher to send me around the world determining what makes people happy and pay me to do it. Like, that's a great job. Like, why didn't I think of that, right? So he wrote this book, The Geography of Bliss, and it ranks countries by happiness, okay? I won't tell you what the book's about. You should read it. It's a good read. It's a New York Times bestseller, if you haven't figured that out. But once you take care of an individual's basic needs, the more we pile onto them, the more complex it gets. Now, Edward Deming is perhaps considered the father of quality improvement. There are tons of great quotes by him. One of my favorite, though, is also the one that I fear as a leader. It says that 85% of the reasons for failure are deficiencies in the systems and processes rather than of the employee. And it is the role of leadership to change the process rather than flogging people to do better. So, if I am in search of trying to create a sustainable clinical practice environment for physicians who have intense economic pressures, political pressures, training pressures, how do I create happiness? How do I get a faculty member who shows up as the best version of themselves to the emergency department and to their own dinner table? Because at any given time, any one of us have experienced where we are not the best version of ourselves in either one of those domains. It is an unfortunate reality of our job. Around this time, the Surgeon General was putting out the structure, the framework for workplace mental health and well-being. I prefer this as the tulip. I don't think it's a tulip, but I couldn't come up with a better name for the diagram. And it talks about protection from harm, opportunity for growth, connection and community, and balance and mattering. And a lot of that goes back to feeling challenged and on mission and trusted and mentored and involved, okay? None of that said making sure you have your defibrillator charged, right? Like, none of that said, are we on a shortage of Ativan this week or Dilaudid next week, okay? So I looked at some very basic stuff. We were struggling at the time. We were self-insured. Our largest, as a chair, I have to manage many different hats, and I look at my line item budget, and my variance is the largest on employee health and wellness. I spend more on benefits than anything else, which is okay. That's important. And I just Googled, like, exercise versus per member per month spending. And there's a dozen articles that look at how we incentivize physicians to take care of themselves. And so we started a WAR program. All my physicians use Strava or these like devices to track their activity, and they report it back to the system. And they were required to work out 100 times a year because we figure there's 52 weeks in the year. Get 2 weeks of vacation at that time. Twice a week, 30 minutes a day, 150 minutes. I can decrease your cardiovascular outcome or decrease your cardiovascular risk factors and improve your life. This is the key to happiness. And so we start this program to mixed reviews. Some people don't like to exercise. Some people do. I have physicians who said, I'm off of 5 blood pressure medicines. I no longer have AFib, and I've lost 50 pounds. And I have physicians who say, yeah, I'm still the same weight I was, but now I walk 30 minutes a day with my wife because they could do whatever they wanted just to participate. It is the single best recruiting thing I have, and it decreased our per member per month spend for our physicians. Now that's care for self, exercise. So then I didn't know this was a thing. I'm on a mission to add to my publications. I would like to publish in the Journal of Happiness Studies. That sounds like, a career goal. And there's dozens of studies that look at happiness and vacation. I looked at our physicians, only 26% of our physicians took 7 consecutive days off in a year. 1 in 4. Okay, yes, attendings actually do work for the residents in the room. There was a study of Finnish travelers that showed that maximum happiness occurred at 8.1 days of vacation. So we instituted mandatory vacation. You had to take 9 days off. In the South, that's beach week. Saturday to Saturday, Sunday for laundry, okay? And we instituted mandatory vacation, but we had faculty who said, well, I know my body and I like long weekends. Or I want to go to Europe and I need longer periods of time. Now, just last month, JAMA published vacation days taken and burnout among physicians. I circled 3, anesthesia, radiology, emergency medicine. They were the ones that had the smallest p-values. There were 2 main outcomes, basically. You actually had to take 21 days of vacation and not have responsibility for your electronic health record inbox. Those are the 2 biggest predictors of happiness and burnout in this group. And they controlled for practice setting, inbox coverage, compensation based on productivity, like, am I losing RVUs by not being there? Am I male? Am I female? Am I young? Am I old? Do I have youngest children in the house? And they did a stepwise regression and found it was just time away to unplug. So we actually had to increase to 21 days. One of my greatest fears. I have to staff the department. Somebody has to work, right? But people need time away. One of my faculty, Emily Hirsch, is my director of wellness, and so she is interested in fatigue risk management systems, and she did this study where we wear actography, these ready bands. It's by a company called Fatigue Science. It's used by the military. It's been validated in industry for heavy machine operators. And she put it on my faculty, and my faculty wore it. And if you look at the readiness, there's high, reduced, and low readiness scores that equate to a blood alcohol level. 10% of the time, my physicians had response times and cognitive patterns equivalent of being drunk from fatigue. They weren't drinking, they were fit for duty, but this was like a come to, moment for me. I thought of this movie called The Wolf of Wall Street. It's an incredibly vulgar and profane movie. You ever seen it? Okay, so there's a scene where the stockbroker is high on some sedative, Quaaludes, that's what it was. And he's rushing back to his house because his phone is tapped and somebody's saying something on the tap phone that they shouldn't have. So he gets in his Lamborghini Countach and he tells a story about how he cornered on rails and he made it home and he ran in the house and ripped the phone out of his partner. Afterwards, you see what it actually looked like. He was so high, he didn't know that he was wrecking his car. The most dangerous person is the one who is impaired and does not know that they are impaired. Okay? So we said people need awareness. So we put aura rings. They say put rings on fingers. And we gave rings to all of our faculties and residents and said, you need to sleep, or you don't need to sleep, or you need to understand how you sleep. And look at your readiness scores when you're coming in for a shift. And right now, we're on the crux of pairing the biometric data with our shift pattern. So I know, you guys have pods, not zones, right? We have zones, red zone, blue zone. I know that if I work 3 red zone shifts in a row, I do not recover well. I know that if I have to drive for overnight shifts at the outlying hospital that has an hour commute on either side, by the second overnight shift, it is very dangerous, to the point we send our faculty home in Ubers because we've had faculty wreck their cars. What we're finding is it is not one size fits all. There is no easy solution. And there are some people who function on no sleep and some people who warn the nurses to not let them do something stupid because they're so tired, okay? And that's really unacceptable that we as a specialty, as an institution of medicine, do not put the rigor around quality improvement and self-care that we do around for our patients. We are creating a zero-harm environment for our patients at the expense of our physicians. So how do we create constructs for that? I say it's yes and, okay? Yeah, I used to give the residents a lecture, The Power of Yes. As an emergency physician and as an emergency resident, when you are on an ICU rotation and your attending says, can you put a central line? You say yes. They say, can you do a consult? You say yes. Your attending says, are you ready to see the next patient? You say yes. This is what I told my residents to do, okay? I still believe in that. I think it's important. But the and is what's important, right? So yes, we have to take care of patients, and we have to do so in a fiscally responsible way that decreases our HACs and HAWs and PSI 90, that's hospital-acquired infections and conditions, all the bad things that happen as we drive towards zero harm. And yes, we must achieve that in the same token and fashion that we provide for longevity for our physicians. 85% of the failures of a system are because of the system, not because of the employee, and it is the responsibility of leadership to change the system. You are blessed by a leadership team here at University Health that is invested in you as residents and faculty and attendings and as a health system. It is not always true depending on where you work. I talked about the four-part aim, right? How do we take care of self? How do we make a four-way win? How can it be good for you as a doctor? How can it be good for your home life, your family, your loved ones, those you care about? How can it be good for your department where you work? And how can you provide for your community? So you're like, what does this have to do with the dead and those about to die, right? So does anybody here know that quote? It's a famous quote, even the military. Anybody know who this is? This is when he retired, he was a brigadier general, but at the time he was a colonel. His name was George Arthur Taylor. He made his career in Sicily as amphibious warfare in the Army. He was the battalion commander for the 16th Battalion, 1st Brigade. I'll get those numbers mixed up. The 1st Brigade is the Big Red One. You ever heard of the Big Red One? There's a book about it by a guy named Stephen Ambrose, I think. It's the D-Day Omaha story, okay? And Omaha Beach was separated by company into Fox Green and Fox Red, and it was about like what was the hardest beach to go up. So you could see Fox Red was nearly a vertical cliff off of the water. Fox Green had this shale shingle, which is about 6 feet off the water line. Sort of a false sense of security. Late in 1943 and 44, Hitler had known there would be an invasion, and he had put all these concrete encampments of machine guns and pillboxes up on the beach, which just rained bullets down as the United States, Britain, Canada, and the Allied forces arrived in plywood boats, the Higgins boats, chest-high water, and ascended on the beach. Now, he was a colonel at the time. He didn't come in the first wave. First wave was about 6 o'clock at low tide. He came in the second wave around 8:15, and he was to make his way to the rear command tent that was supposed to be set up. But he arrived to find that the rear command tent didn't exist. He actually met the company surgeon, a doctor named Tegenmeyer, and he was still frozen. He had been seasick and vomiting on the way in, and he grabbed him and he pulled him with him. And the Allied forces has misjudged the bombing. Our naval superiority and aerial superiority was thought to be what was going to make us win the beach. And so 12 hours earlier, they had started bombing, but they misjudged where to bomb, and they were bombing inland, not on the beach, which left all of the Nazi forces on the beach to attack the Allied forces coming in. So you have soldiers who are laden with 150 pounds of equipment who are dropped off in chest-high water, running as fast as they can to a shingle or up a cliff while machine gun fire is coming down on them. None of the equipment worked. The rifles are covered in sand. The radios that were supposed to work to be able to tell the forces where to shoot the tracer bullets, to shoot the pillboxes, were all like shattered and broken in pieces. Like anything that could go wrong basically was going wrong. This was like the largest Operation Overlord to date. And Colonel Taylor is walking on the beach at full erect posture. And he is telling soldiers that they have to get up and they have to move. He said, there are two types of people on the beach, those that are dead and those that are about to die. So get your off the beach. Now, he had a small company, and there's like 40 accounts from Canadian forces to British forces of this US officer running up and down the beach telling people, like, gentlemen, if we're gonna get shot, let's not get shot in the water, let's get shot on land. Get off the beach, okay? You're still like, what does this have to do with emergency medicine, right? Okay? So, you cannot be paralyzed. You have to find your North Star, whatever that passion is. A North Star can be, in business, it's a key performance indicator. In medicine, it could be, the love of clinical medicine and caring for patients at the bedside with complex, cardiovascular collapse and how you drive their hemodynamics. It is something that gives you purpose, something that you focus on. It is something that will get you off the beach. Because if you stay on the beach concerned about, well, United Healthcare makes all the money and everybody's getting fired and everybody's getting replaced and our jobs are burning out and, longevity in our career sucks, that you will never leave the beach. You have to get off the beach. I don't want you to think I don't love EM. I love this, right? Honestly, I don't know how to earn the 5th star, right? Okay? I love what I do. I take care of patients at their most vulnerable moment, and I consider the practice of emergency medicine to be a great privilege. I like to do it on nights and weekends. I like to do it on holidays. You learn a lot walking through a hospital in the middle of the night, even as a volunteer. I don't want you to think that the picture we have painted is one of dismay and a dismantling of a specialty that you've committed your careers to, but rather we as a specialty are a group of committed individuals and are led by committed physicians who are willing to make efforts to make it a win for you, your family, the departments you work for, and the communities we work in. Love what you do. You should love what you do. And you should convey that as a prophecy to everybody you talk to about how much you love what you do. Because if you mire down in the negativity that comes at you from economic, organizational, administrative burdens, you will struggle to get off the beach. So, only two kinds of people. Those that are dead and those that are about to die. Your job as an emergency physician is to get rid of the second one, okay? I hope that you enjoyed the talk, if nothing else, it passed the time. I hope that you found one nugget here that you will carry forward into your career, none of which has to do with clinical medicine at the bedside, but will make you a more well-rounded physician. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt, for that wonderful walk through medicine and emergency medicine. Going back to the workforce issues, I think a lot of us are trying to figure out how we deal with the exponential growth in residency positions in the country and who is ultimately going to be the one to address those issues. So
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
I do. So, when I graduated residency, there were 136 EM residencies in the United States. And by 2020, I think 2021, there were 297. It is a complex issue about who will address the actual regulatory requirements around workforce. I will tell you that the RRC guidelines, the Residency Review Committee guidelines of the ACGME, were written at a time where emergency medicine did not have those visits skyrocketing. Like, I think the minimum requirements for an EM residency is about 38 or 40,000 visits. I think that this is a perfect example. Like, the physicians who are training in more traditional academic spots, okay, non-contract management, non-for-profit systems, who have level 1 trauma and subspecialty and tertiary care access, are the ones who are going to shape our specialty. As a chair, I see, I told you that I see 350,000 patient visits a year. That's from freestanding EDs that see 15 to 18,000 visits, all up to the 130,000 visit mega centers. And I see faculty candidates who arrive from training programs on the East Fork of Rattlesnake Creek who've never worked at a hospital with more than 35,000 visits and did 1 month of level 1 drama on an away rotation. And we do a disservice to them to put them in a clinical environment where they would just drown. So there is some self-selection that will occur just based on your practice environment. For residents in the room, you might get asked, where'd you practice? How many visits did you have? What was your admission rate? Those sorts of things, because people want to know what type of clinical environment you work in. American College of Emergency Physicians has come out with like a 4-part strategy around the EM workforce, and there's been calls for redaction of the workforce study, because I didn't get into it, but the workforce study for 2030 used pre-COVID attrition rates. I can tell you I lost all of my faculty over 65 in the first 6 months of COVID. They were PRN or part-time, and they're like, I have grandkids, I'm out of here, okay? And so our attrition rate quadrupled during COVID. I actually think the dip in applications is a little bit of a confounder and has less to do about the workforce study as it has to do with the waning shine of emergency medicine. Does everybody here remember the pots and pans and the healthcare hero days of COVID? And people were like so thankful, right? And as students rotate through our departments now, and there's nobody banging pots and pans, and instead there are boarders and wait times that exceed days, and behavioral health patients who have length of stays in weeks and months in some facilities, and you see community physicians struggle to transfer patients. These are all real problems we have to deal with in our specialty. There are solutions. I firmly believe there are solutions. They are multifactorial. They will not happen overnight, and they will require constant pressure, right? We all know working out's good for us. I guarantee you, if you go to the gym and you come back and look in the mirror, you'll see nothing, right? And you go to the gym the next day and you come back and you look in the mirror and you'll still see nothing, right? Okay? It is consistency of coming and going every day that will create change. We all focus on intensity. Okay, we bring people into a lectureship like this. We say, hey, you attended the McNabney lecture. Here's your certificate. You were all leaders, right? That's an intense experience, and that will not change the face of what we face in emergency medicine. We need everybody in the room laser focused on addressing those issues that are what our next generation of physicians see as our practice environment. So, long way to say, I think that ACEP is going to continue to advocate around improving requirements to demonstrate what the modern practice of emergency medicine is. There's a call for the ACGME to have the program requirements reflect that, because it's very hard, just the sheer growth in ED volumes. I don't know what you guys have experienced here. We experienced about 6.4% growth year over year. And right now, that's what I budgeted, and I'm running 26% ahead on my volumes. 26%. I look like a horrible budgeter, right? Because I couldn't figure that out. But we have an aging population. You guys have heard of the silver tsunami. I don't know if you heard, like last week, there was great concern that Medicare and Medicaid was going to run out of money by 2030 if we didn't change something because we have all the baby boomers coming through. Those are our patients. Those are the highest utilizer. If you look at ED utilization by age band, the 60 to 70-year-olds have the highest ED visits per 100,000 of population, and that is the fastest growing segment of our population right now in the silver tsunami. So it is yet to be determined, and we're going to have to continue to work on ensuring that we as a specialty advocate what we believe to be representative of the modern practice of emergency medicine, and make sure that the regulatory body, which is completely separate from the college, has training programs that reflect what physicians will face when they get out. It's hard. And we should talk about it, not just once a year at lectures like this. Like, we have to talk about it all the time, because this room is filled with smarter people than me, okay? We have to have different views and perspective, diversity of thought, like Dr. Dominguez said, in the room. If you're not in the room, you know, it's Hamilton, right? You know, I set the venue, the seating, right? You have to be in the room where it happens. So you got to show up. Other questions?
What can be done about verbal and physical violence directed towards emergency department personnel? And what is the cause for that diversity?
Cause is probably a harder nut to crack. What can be done against violence against healthcare workers? So raise your hand if you've been assaulted by a patient. Assaulted. Physically, verbally, emotionally, spiritually. It's not really funny, you know? I watched a patient who was intoxicated on meth punch one of my nurses in the head before he punched me. And as an institution, you have to have a system of reporting, for starters. When, you know, if you survey the room like I did, everybody's been assaulted. If you look at the data, nobody's been assaulted. It's part of the job, right? We just go about our business and don't report it, okay? So you have to have a reporting system. You have to have a healthcare system that is okay. I should say, we have to have a US healthcare system that is okay recognizing that just because you have the word patient after you doesn't mean that you are not held liable to the same things that occur on the street. You have to, as a physician, be willing to write a report, go to court, testify, and have your patient jailed. That's a hard position, okay? Having sat on the stand for that individual who assaulted my nurse and assaulted me and getting him 30 days in jail, I did it not for me, but I did it for my nurse, okay? And that means on a day off, not that that exists, I had to like cancel meetings and go talk to the magistrate and the judge and explain why this is unacceptable behavior. And I have better things to do, and I don't know, maybe I missed a soccer practice for my daughter or, you know, something, but we have to do it. If we don't do it, we are enabling. Do you guys have a mandated police force in the health system? Like police officers or security? Security. So you have to be willing to wait for the actual law enforcement officer to come to file the report. And you have to learn how to write a report. You know how to learn to write an assault. And you also have to know the boundaries of a physician. So for instance, I can't testify to the patient's health because I'm their doctor. I was their treating physician. I can only. And I had to have a legal counsel. The health system provided legal counsel to me to show me those boundaries, to give me those resources so that I didn't do anything. Because I said that I don't want to harm the patient, and the judge doesn't need to know his medical history. He just needs to know why he shouldn't be assaulting patients. I think the second part of your question, the society we live in is under the same pressures we are as physicians. Except if you look at the social determinants of health, the disparity among high earners and low earners got worse in the pandemic. You know, the effects, everybody complains about inflation. The effects of inflation on high earners means that you travel less. This is studied, this is not me. You travel less, you eat out less, and you have less disposable income. And on the low earners, you decide between feeding your family, paying rent, or making a car payment. That's well studied. So I like to complain about inflation just like everybody else does, but they're making hard decisions complicated by the selection bias we see in the emergency department around behavioral health and substance use disorders. You know, if you're intoxicated, and we have toxicologists in the room, you have impaired medical decision making, right? Like we do this every day. What's the patient's capacity for decision making? And so I think first and foremost, we have to count it, talk about it, support the physicians who are going through it, and give them the resources necessary and the time necessary to follow through on it. Because that individual now will receive a medical screening exam, but will not be allowed on the facility property because it's actually the second time he assaulted a nurse. So it's really challenging. Violence against healthcare workers, we think we have it bad in the emergency department. It is equally as bad upstairs on the floors in the inpatient units where the staff has been countless more hours with the patient because there is a sense of familiarity if you have the same nurse for 7 days in a row and their boundaries go down and then they experience violence just like we do in the emergency department. Thanks. There was one other question. Or no?
I was just going to reiterate what you said about advocacy. I attended my first advocacy day this year, not a national but statewide, and I was fairly intimidated by going to speak to your state representative, but is that they come from various backgrounds, don't have a lot of experience in healthcare, and it's actually fairly easy. So like, as my residents are graduating next year, like getting involved in your state ASAP chapters and going to advocacy day, because the people who are trying to steal our cheese are there a lot more than the doctors are, so.
Yeah, I mean, I do the doctor a day. This year as president, I've had to be on the Hill a lot more in South Carolina, and I'm still only there maybe 3 or 4 times a year, and the other lobbies are there every single day. And on the state level, state representatives are not full-time legislators. They have jobs and they're insurance brokers and tow truck operators. I have a state legislator who operates a tow truck. And so like when I'm talking about complex medical issues about like rural access to care and scope of practice with a tow truck operator, like you can have that conversation. You can clearly articulate the 3 bullets, you know. If I channel my inner Corey Slovis was the chair at Vanderbilt. He believes there's 5 things for everything. There's 5 things in your differential. There's 5 treatments. There's 5 diagnoses. Try to remember and distill everything down to 5 things to tell your legislator, because they're only going to remember 3. But you can have those conversations. It is very easy. You do not need to be intimidated. I know that as a resident and as a physician, outside of medicine, we all suffer from imposter syndrome, right? Like, I think I'm a pretty good doctor. I'm not really good at anything else in life because I've spent my career being a doctor. So when I go talk to a lawyer or a legislator or a car mechanic, like they have subject matter expertise that I don't have. But when you are advocating for your profession, it is very easy. You just got to do it. The hardest part, starting, showing up. Show up, don't get fed up. Stand up, speak up, and do it over and over again. It's fatiguing, and you have to do it over and over again, like showing up to the gym or brushing your teeth for 2 minutes every day so you don't have rotten teeth when you go to the dentist and they yell at you.
The studies that you did looking at like sleep deprivation, did you only include attendings in that, or were residents included?
That initial study was attendings only. Residents are considered a vulnerable population, like pregnant women. For purposes of IRB, for the purposes of IRB, we did not include them. However, our residents are included in our Aura ring and are using that for their own readiness. And we're moving toward a fatigue risk management system. I haven't figured out how to do it, but we're going to have fatigue call when someone is too tired. We're modeling it after the airline industry. And the National Health Service in Australia and the UK both have that. There's repercussions. You can't just be like, yeah, I'm a little tired. Like I work my Friday overnight shift. But we need to have that resource available if somebody actually is too tired where they could hurt themselves or hurt somebody else. And we have to do it. This is a call to arms. If we don't do it, we will see the other study published that shows that this is a non-sustainable career and that women 2 to 1 over men are leaving emergency medicine in their like 40s in less than 20 years. And that nobody is working 30 years in emergency medicine. You know, we have a graying of the physician population. That's why we have a primary care access issue and why we have subspecialty access issues. And this is occurring nationally, everywhere, because medicine's really hard and people don't want to do that for 50 years anymore. And part of that is, again, our responsibility as an institution, as a leadership, to provide a sustainable clinical practice environment where you feel that you can spend your whole career. Question?
Yeah, I liked a lot of what you said about wellness and providing rings or changing vacation. And I think, to be honest, the conundrum in applications to emergency medicine is primarily about wellness, in my opinion. Same way with primary care, same way with the uptake in anesthesia applications or something else that has a maybe better PR. But my question is, that requires a lot of investment in physicians. And so as a chair, where are you finding that you get that motivation to make that investment? And then how do the physicians in the emergency department motivate their health company to make that investment?
Yeah, so the short answer is, as a chair, I'm still a physician. And I say that purposefully and intentionally, and that much the same as your physicians in leadership here, we all still work and experience the same stressors. In fact, most of my faculty hate it when I work because I'm like, like, this doesn't work, and why is that not on the quick list, and, you know, this order needs to be changed, and I find all the things that are broken in the system, and I put in a ticket to get it fixed, and it's probably been like that for 6 months. I will tell you that the first hurdle was the hardest, paying physicians to exercise, right? That's really hard. And that is a very specific non-participatory health plan. I had to research, it took me 2 years with a labor lawyer because the federal government says that in health and wellness plans, you're not allowed to exceed 20% of the value for participatory wellness plans than the cost of that person's benefits. So I'll do simple math and say if it costs me $100 a pay period with 26 pay periods per year, I spend $2,600 on my health insurance. I could only have a plan that benefits the physician $520 for a participatory plan, which may have requirements under GINA, the Genetic Information Nomenclature, all these other like federal legislation. And then there are non-participatory plans, which is why in a non-participatory plan, you could do equestrian events and you could do meditation and you can do roller derby, whatever you want to participate. However, I had to demonstrate my per member per month spending as a self-insured agency to then further my wellness, because I spend a lot of money on anti-fragility. And I had to make the economic argument, and I actually linked it sometimes unsuccessfully to outcomes too, because our enrolled physicians also had their throughput times, length of stay, patient experience, and left without being seen rates ranked by participation in their wellness program. And those that actually participated more over and above, more pragmatic detail than you need, but you can't work out the first 100 days of the year, the last 100 days of the year. It has to be over the whole year. You get credit for your war activities at a maximum of 25 per quarter. The idea that you do something all the time. And those individuals who had less sporadic and more consistent participation in the program actually had better patient experience scores and lower lengths of stay. So then I got into some complicated attribution math about how that increased throughput and had cost savings in addition to the fact that I was just spending less on their health care too. Once that door was open, it allowed us to do the other things around vacation and around fatigue risk management. Fatigue risk management was a huge investment, but the faculty actually were asking for that too. So we actually drive some of their physician variable compensation plan to help drive our well-being. Because you can only like have joy carts and water and Christmas parties so much before it doesn't actually impact your wellness. Question?
Yeah, earlier you were talking about how physicians aren't really taught how to teach our patients. Do you have any thoughts or advice about how to improve the patient-physician relationship in terms of trust?
Yeah, so there are whole fellowships around that. And I will tell you, I did my master's in instructional system design, which was designed on taking learners like this who don't learn sitting in an audience watching PowerPoints that I just vomited at you for the past hour and a half. I would tell you, there are some unique traditional continuing medical education opportunities around patient experience. And patient experience is not a dirty word. Like the best thing we could ever have was it changed from patient satisfaction to patient experience. All of us have been a patient, right? And like you go to see your doctor and they're like, oh, your blood pressure's up. And you're like, oh, probably because I waited an hour and a half in your waiting room, right? You know, like it destroys the experience. And so we started at a disadvantage in emergency medicine because like everybody's been waiting, right? Nobody wakes up and says, hey, today's the day I get to go to the ER, right? They say, they might have been waiting 6 months to see the rheumatologist and they have a positive anticipation bias toward what they're going to experience there, but nobody ever wants to come to the emergency department. So there are simple things. These are, you know, they're well described, you know, simple techniques from like acknowledgement, right? I mean, did you guys have a vendor like Prescani or? Yeah. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Prescani is a flawed survey instrument, but like you guys have heard of AID IT, you know, that was the, what was that guy who did breast surgery? Anyway, but you just acknowledge the fact, patients just want to be heard. You know, I tell my faculty, I start my faculty meeting with their kudos of all the positive things patients said about them because like, it never happens. Like we never hear back from them and they need that positive feedback. So it is okay to acknowledge with patients that they've waited a long time. it is okay to sit down at the bedside for 10 seconds. Little fun story, they studied orthopedic surgeons who sat down in the room versus stood in the room, and even the orthopedic surgeons who spent less time in the room, which was the one sitting, had higher scores than the one standing. So you can spend less time, not that you should, take a complete history of physical as necessary for the patient's presenting complaint, but like the mere fact of sitting increases the perception that you were there longer, with 0. Some of it is scripting and messaging in terms of trust. Like when you put the rail up, I always say, I'm sorry, I'm putting the rail up for your safety. I don't want you to fall out, right? I'm closing the curtain for your privacy, because you need to tell them why you're doing it. Patients don't understand. They're like, oh, he doesn't want to see me staring at him at the nurse's station. You're like, well, I just didn't want you to see the sensitive exam I have to do in the hallway because we're boarding 50 patients, right? If you are seriously interested, there are quality improvement fellowships, both, and there are grants through AHRQ and HRSA that look at that, and they're all the way from like weekend courses to this is what I want to do with my life and be a director of quality improvement or quality assurance safety. You can learn about PDSA and all of these other techniques to improve that. Unfortunately, when it comes to it, I think building patient trust comes with the number of patients you see. Because as a physician, it's a relationship with the individuals that you care for. And just the mere acknowledgement that that's what it is, and that it is not a business transaction, and that you are not a provider, you are a physician, or you are a PA, or you are a resident, establishes that relationship. All of those terms were used to separate doctors from their relationships with patients, instituted by insurance companies. So it's messaging, it is bedside acumen and bedside manner, and it is a learned skill. Sorry, I know that's not the answer you wanted. I wish there was a course for it. You could just do a CBT.
Yeah.
Other questions?
You mentioned provider. Have you been able to get rid of that word in your system?
I have. I've stricken it from all my contracts. I had our board of governors move to strike it. It's harder with the processors, the payers, but this coming fiscal year will mark the first time it does not appear in any physician or APC contract. I think it degrades, and I think it has to be a reflection of who you are. For those of you who don't know, there are multiple organizations, the American College, the Western Journal, Kaiser Foundation, the Mayo Clinic, the Geisinger Clinic, who have moved to strike the word provider. Provider comes from a German word. Actually, during the Third Reich and the Nazi regime, they said that Jewish physicians were not allowed to be called physicians, and they renamed them providers. And they actually removed them from their professional societies. So there's a lot of angst around the word provider. There's a lot of angst in the world today, but yes, and it took 5 years. And United Healthcare still calls us providers.
Hospital bylaws they're gone from that?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. We're working on that.
One step at a time. You just got to keep, showing up. There was a question in the back.
Yeah, so, residency's hard, but what have you found that kind of has helped decrease the sensation for the feeling of residency burnout? Like, have you changed anything, any tips or tricks?
Well, there's no tips or tricks, because if there was, then there was an easy button, we would have fixed it for everybody, right? And if you remember the tool-up that talks about like connection and community and mattering at work and protection from harm, your residency program director and staff are trying to create a clinical learning environment for you where you feel that you can balance the fact that you have 36 months. What year are you?
I'm intending.
Oh, okay. Even better.
Thank you, though.
You should take the compliment, right? So my PGY3s have 53 days, 58 minutes, and 45 seconds until they graduate. And I have a little reminder, it says they get released into the wide, wide world. Okay? And so my job is in those 58 days to impart that to them. However, it is meeting the resident where they are, because they all have different life stages. There was a time where everybody came through college and everybody came through med school and was all about the same age and were all either single or not single, married or not married, had kids or didn't have kids, but it was a fairly homogenous. And what we have seen because of the course of medical education is there's much more heterogeneity in our residency class. I have interns with 3 kids, and I have third years who are single. And so like, how do we craft an environment that supports their learning and also supports them who they are as a person? Again, that 4-way win, right? Self, home, work, and community. So it has to be very individualized. We use probably a lot of the same things you do in terms of structure of leadership so that they have mentorship across classes, down to class conferences, down to a mix of longitudinal curriculums and experiences that pepper in with their core rotations. Because at the end of the day, they have 36 months to learn the trade. And they're gonna be the smartest they are 3 to 5 years out if we impart what we need to in those 36 months. But there's no easy answer. If there was, I wouldn't be here talking to you. There'd be like an easy button somewhere that you could push. Questions? Great questions. You should do this for your legislators. You should do this. You should knock on Dr. Aller's door, tomorrow and ask him about,
Maybe not tomorrow.
No, I think you're blessed with a leadership team that is invested in you as residents and as an educational program. You are in a clinical learning environment that is ripe with pathology, right? Physicians are good at only one thing. Doesn't matter your specialty. We spot pathology, right? And whether that is like the patient in front of you or looking at the spreadsheet that your administrator gave you, you can find what's wrong with it, okay? And so you're in a great intersection in your career of having plenty of sick people to take care of, plenty of people who care about making sure you are your best in that environment and ensuring your success. I can't say the same about all residency training programs that I have seen, okay? I glossed over the KKR and the Blackstone slides and the HCA slides, and not every training program relishes in what you have here. So I would enjoy the training that you have, enjoy the time that you have as individuals. You don't know it yet, but it is incredibly formative and you will forge lifelong friendships and professional relationships. And I'm sorry, I thought you were a resident.
Well, thank you again very much.